People walk into my courtroom every single day under the bizarre delusion that I was born yesterday. They march through those wooden doors, stand at the podium, and genuinely believe they have invented a brand new way to lie. It's a fascinating psychological study, really. You have to wonder about the absolute sheer arrogance of an individual who looks at a judge, someone who has spent the better part of her adult life listening to every excuse, scam, and half-baked fairy tale under the sun and thinks, yeah, I'm the one who's going to fool her. It doesn't make me angry anymore. It just exhausts me. But every now and then, I get someone who isn't just a garden variety liar. I get someone whose arrogance is so loudly obnoxious, so blindingly foolish, that I have to remind them exactly whose room they are standing in. Today, that monumental reminder was reserved for a Mr. David Sterling. The moment he swaggered up to the defendant's podium, I had him completely figured out. You don't sit on the bench as long as I have without developing a sixth sense for character. He was wearing a shiny gray suit that screamed discount rack, his posture practically dripping with an unearned sense of superiority. He had that arrogant little smirk, the one that says, I'm the smartest guy in the room, and the rest of you are just my audience. He was practically vibrating with the desperate need to hear his own voice. He didn't see a judge up here. He saw an obstacle to his own brilliant monologue. On the other side stood the plaintiff, Miss Chloe Vance. She looked entirely different. She was a petite woman clutching a thick manila folder to her chest like it was a bulletproof vest. Her eyes were darting nervously around the room, terrified of the cameras, terrified of the environment, and completely exhausted by the man standing across the aisle from her. You could see the toll this dispute had taken on her just by looking at the bags under her eyes. She was suing Mr. Sterling, her former boyfriend, for $5,000. According to her complaint, it was a loan. According to his counterclaim, it was a gift. It is the oldest story in the book. Two people fall in love. One of them has a grand illusion of becoming the next tech billionaire. The other one has a savings account. Love makes you do stupid things, and parting with your hard-earned money without a written contract is right at the top of that list. I looked down at the paperwork in front of me, tapped my pen on the desk, and looked right at the plaintiff. I always start with the plaintiff. It's her claim. I asked Miss Vance to explain to me, simply and without a 20-minute preamble about her feelings, why she handed $5,000 to a man she had only been dating for 6 months. She took a deep breath, her hands visibly shaking, and told me that Mr. Sterling had come to her with a foolproof business plan. He wanted to start an app development company. He needed seed money for software and licensing. He promised her, verbally, that he would pay her back within 90 days once his initial investors came through. And did he? I asked, already knowing the answer. No, Your Honor, she said quietly. He took the money, bought a high-end gaming computer, and then broke up with me 2 weeks later. I shifted my gaze to Mr. Sterling. The smirk was still there, plastered across his face like a cheap bumper sticker. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice completely flat. Did you receive $5,000 from Miss Vance? He leaned on the podium, crossing one ankle over the other as if he were at a cocktail party rather than in a court of law. Well, Your Honor, I think we need to look at the context of our relationship at that time. You see, I didn't ask you for context, sir, I interrupted, cutting him off at the knees. I asked you a yes or no question. Did you receive $5,000 from this woman? It is not a trick question. It does not require a philosophical dissertation. Yes or no? He bristled. I could see the irritation flashing in his eyes. People like Mr. Sterling hate being interrupted. They hate being controlled. They are so used to talking over the women in their lives that when a woman in a black robe tells them to shut up and answer the question, their brains completely short-circuit. Yes, I received the money, he said, dragging the words out. But it was a gift. She gave it to me because she believed in my potential. There was never any talk of repayment. Baloney, I said, just like that, because that's exactly what it was. You expect me to believe that a 24-year-old woman who works as a dental hygienist making a modest salary just handed over $5,000 of her savings to a guy she'd been dating for 6 months as a gift? Do I have stupid written across my forehead? I'm just telling you the truth, he shot back, his volume rising just a fraction of a decibel. If she wanted it to be a loan, she should have made me sign a contract. She didn't. So legally, it's a gift. Ah, the armchair lawyer, my absolute favorite breed of defendant. They spend 30 minutes reading a legal forum on the internet, and suddenly they think they are ready to argue in front of the Supreme Court. Let me explain something to you, Mr. Sterling, I said, leaning forward and pointing my pen directly at him. You don't tell me what the law is. I tell you what the law is. I have been practicing law since before you were a twinkle in your father's eye. A contract does not have to be written in blood on a piece of parchment to be valid. We look at the circumstances, we look at the intent, we look at common sense, and common sense tells me that nobody gives away $5,000 to a boyfriend of 6 months just because he has potential. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I am not finished, I snapped. You will speak when I tell you to speak. Now, Miss Vance, do you have any text messages or emails regarding this money? She nodded eagerly, fumbling with her manila folder. Yes, Your Honor. I have printouts of our text messages from the week before I gave him the money and from 2 months after. The bailiff walked over, took the stack of papers from her shaking hands, and brought them up to my bench. I adjusted my glasses and began to read. Text messages are the greatest gift technology ever gave to a judge. People lie, but their thumbs don't. They put everything in writing, hit send, and then conveniently forget about it when they stand in front of me. The first few pages were standard. She asked what he needed the money for. He replied with a long, convoluted paragraph about servers and coding and beta testing. Then, right at the bottom of the second page, there it was, the smoking gun. Miss Vance had written, I can transfer the $5,000 tomorrow, but I really need it back by October for my tuition. Mr. Sterling had replied, Don't worry, babe. I'll have it back to you by September with interest. I looked up from the papers. I took my glasses off and set them deliberately on the desk. The courtroom was dead silent. I let the silence hang there for a moment, letting the tension build, watching Mr. Sterling's smug little smile begin to falter just a tiny bit. He didn't know what I was reading, but he knew it wasn't good for him. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice dangerously calm, are you familiar with the concept of perjury? Excuse me? He said, standing up a little straighter. Perjury. It means lying under oath. It means standing in front of a judge, swearing to tell the truth, and then spewing absolute garbage out of your mouth. Are you familiar with it? I'm not lying, he insisted, his voice taking on a whiny, defensive edge. Really? I picked up the papers again and waved them in the air. Because I am holding a text message right here, sent from your phone number, where you explicitly promised to pay Miss Vance back by September with interest. Now, either somebody stole your phone and promised to pay your debts out of the goodness of their heart, or you are a liar. The color drained from Mr. Sterling's face. It is a beautiful thing to witness the exact moment a con artist realizes the jig is up. For a split second, the arrogant facade crumbled, leaving nothing but a panicked little boy, desperately trying to find an exit. But people like him never just apologize and admit defeat. Their egos simply won't allow it. Instead, they pivot. They dig the hole deeper. Well, he stammered, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. You have to understand the context of that text message. Oh, context again. I clapped my hands together once, a sharp, loud crack that echoed through the room. Please enlighten me. What possible context makes I will have it back to you by September with interest mean? Thank you for the free money that I never intend to return. He gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning white. She was feeling insecure about the investment. I only texted her that to calm her down so she wouldn't stress about it. It was a pacification strategy. I stared at him. I just stared. Sometimes The most powerful tool a judge has is absolute, deafening silence. I let his utterly ridiculous explanation hang in the air, letting the sheer stupidity of it wash over the entire courtroom. The gallery was dead quiet. Even Bird, my bailiff, who has heard every ridiculous excuse on the planet, let out a low, barely audible sigh. A pacification strategy, I repeated, my voice flat, chewing on the words as if they tasted sour. So, let me get this straight, sir. Your defense against the accusation that you lied to me today is that you were lying to her then? No, that's not what I'm saying, he protested, his voice cracking slightly. That is exactly what you are saying, I fired back, leaning over the bench. You are telling me that you wrote a promise to repay a loan, a promise you just admitted you had no intention of keeping, just to get your hands on her money. In my courtroom, we call that fraud. We call that a scam. We do not call it a pacification strategy. You are playing semantic games with the wrong person, Mr. Sterling. You're twisting my words, Your Honor, he complained, pointing a finger at me. Put your finger down before it falls off, I snapped. I am reading your words, black and white, right here. Now, let's talk about this so-called business you needed the seed money for. Miss, Vance claims you took her $5,000 and bought a high-end gaming computer. Is that true? He puffed out his chest, trying to regain some semblance of his shattered dignity. I purchased a high-performance, custom-built processing machine. Yes, it was absolutely essential for the app development I was undertaking. You need massive processing power to compile code and run beta simulations. It's a business expense. I looked over at Miss Vance. Did he ever build this app, ma'am? She shook her head vigorously, a sad, vindicated little smile finally breaking through her nerves. No, Judge, he never wrote a single line of code. He plugged the computer into the living room TV and spent 14 hours a day playing Call of Duty and screaming at teenagers on the internet. When I asked him about the app, he told me I didn't understand the creative process. I turned my gaze back to the defendant. 14 hours a day playing video games. Is that your idea of beta testing, sir? She doesn't know what she's talking about. Sterling exploded, his voice rising significantly. He slammed his hand down on the podium. She has no idea how the tech industry works. You have to study the market. You have to analyze user engagement. Video games are $1 billion industry. I was doing market research. You were playing games on her dime. I yelled right back, completely unfazed by his temper tantrum. I do not get intimidated by loud men. I eat loud men for breakfast. You took a hard-working woman's money, lied to her about building a business, and bought yourself a toy. And now you have the unmitigated gall to stand in my courtroom and insult my intelligence by calling it market research? It is market research, he screamed, his face turning a deep, splotchy purple. The smirk was entirely gone now, replaced by blind, irrational rage. He was losing control, and he knew it. The more I boxed him in with facts and logic, the more erratic he became. You just don't get it. You're sitting up there judging me, but you don't know the first thing about technology. You're just taking her side because she's playing the victim. The courtroom collectively gasped. You could hear a pin drop. Bird stepped forward, his hand resting casually near his belt, his eyes locked on Sterling. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just sat back in my leather chair, folded my hands together, and let him burn himself to the ground. Are you quite finished? I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. No, I'm not finished, he yelled, pacing behind the podium now, waving his arms frantically. This whole thing is a joke. She gave me a gift. I didn't force her to transfer the money. She did it because she wanted to. And now that we're broken up, she's throwing a tantrum and using you to get her money back. And you're falling for it. He stood there, chest heaving, glaring at me as if he had just delivered the winning argument of the century. He honestly thought that by raising his voice and throwing a temper tantrum, he was taking control of the narrative. He thought volume equated to power. It is the tragic miscalculation of every foolish man who has ever walked into my courtroom. I picked up my pen. I tapped it on the desk. Once, twice. Mr. Sterling, I said, cold as ice. Let me explain the reality of your situation. You have just committed the biggest mistake of your entire life. You thought you could walk in here, act like a bully, and scream your way out of a debt. You thought that because I am a woman, or because I am older than you, that I would back down when you raised your voice. But you are terribly confused about who holds the cards here. I don't care about your market research. I don't care about your pacing. And I certainly don't care about your opinions on my technological literacy. I leaned in close to the microphone. What I care about is the fact that you owe this young woman $5,000. And your little outburst just sealed your fate. He stood there, frozen. The echo of his own shouting seemed to bounce off the oak-paneled walls and smack him right in his overly groomed face. It is a spectacular phenomenon, watching the adrenaline drain out of a bully when they realize their intimidation tactics have hit a brick wall. He blinked once, twice, his chest deflating as the reality of his situation finally began to penetrate that thick skull of his. He looked at me, then glanced nervously over at Bird, who was still standing at attention, a silent promise of swift consequences if Mr. Sterling took one step in the wrong direction. Are you done throwing your little tantrum? I asked, keeping my voice conversational, almost bored. Because if you have another tantrum left in your system, I can have Bird escort you out to the hallway until you learn how to behave like a civilized adult. We can finish this case without you. Your choice. He swallowed hard. I'm done. Good. Now, stand up straight, stop fidgeting, and keep your mouth firmly shut until I ask you a direct question. Do you understand? He gave a stiff, jerky nod. Yes, Your Honor. Excellent. Progress. I flipped to the second section of the case file. Now that we've established that you are a liar who scammed this young woman out of $5,000 to fund your video game addiction, let us move on to the sheer comedy of your counterclaim. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the audacity does not stop at theft. I held up a piece of paper, dangling it between my thumb and forefinger like a dirty tissue. You are countersuing Miss Vance for $2,000. The cause of action you have listed here is emotional distress and interference with business relations. I have to admit, Mr. Sterling, I read a lot of fairy tales in my chambers, but this one deserves a Pulitzer for creative writing. I looked over my glasses at him. You claim that Miss Vance's constant harassment caused you severe mental anguish, which delayed the launch of your phantom application, costing you future revenue. Is that the gist of your delusion? He gripped the podium, trying to muster back some of his lost bravado. It's not a delusion, Your Honor. She was calling me obsessively, texting me 20, 30 times a day. I couldn't focus. I couldn't write code. Every time I tried to get into a state of creative flow, my phone was ringing. She completely sabotaged my business environment. I turned my head to the plaintiff. Miss Vance, were you calling him 30 times a day? She sighed, a weary sound that came from the very bottom of her soul. Yes, Judge, I was. But it wasn't to harass him about the loan. Not at first. Then what were you calling him about? I was calling him because I was at work at the dental clinic, and I started getting fraud alerts on my phone. He had linked my debit card to his food delivery app without telling me. While I was cleaning teeth, he was ordering $50 sushi lunches and charging them to my account. I was calling him to tell him to stop stealing from me. I slowly turned my gaze back to Mr. Sterling. The man was a walking, talking masterclass in parasitic behavior. Sushi. Mr. Sterling? On the plaintiff's dime? While she was working and you were sitting in your pajamas researching video games? She gave me the card details for emergencies, he blurted out, his voice cracking. She said if I ever needed anything while she was at work, I could use it. I was working 14-hour days. I needed sustenance. A spicy tuna roll is not an emergency, sir, I fired back, my tone completely deadpan. A medical crisis is an emergency. A flat tire on the freeway is an emergency. Ordering premium sashimi from a high-end Japanese restaurant at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon is not an emergency. It is mooching. You are a mooch. I am an entrepreneur, he practically shrieked, his fragile ego shattering into a million pieces. You are a parasite, I corrected him, raising my voice just enough to cut through his nonsense. An entrepreneur creates value. A parasite attaches itself to a host and drains it dry until there is nothing left. You saw this young woman, hardworking, responsible, naive, and you saw a bank. You saw an ATM that you could manipulate with sweet talk and empty promises. She's lying about the card, he yelled, completely ignoring my previous warning about keeping his mouth shut. She told me I could use it. She wanted to support my dream. Miss Vance, I said, ignoring his outburst entirely. Do you have the bank statements showing these charges? Yes, Your Honor. Right here. She handed a second stack of papers to Bird, who delivered them to my desk. I scanned the documents. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just food delivery. It was in-game purchases, microtransactions, skin upgrades for his video game characters. I looked at the itemized list, shaking my head in absolute disgust. Mr. Sterling, you are a grown man, I said, reading from the statement. Can you please explain to the court why, on August 14th, you spent $45 of your girlfriend's hard-earned money to buy a Neon Commando outfit for a digital avatar? The courtroom erupted into snickers. I banged my gavel once, not because I minded the laughter, but to keep the record clean. The absolute humiliation on his face was palpable. His ears were bright red. It was a business expense, he mumbled, staring down at his shoes. A business expense, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. A Neon Commando outfit for a video game. That is your defense. You have to engage with the platform to understand the consumer demographics, he yelled, his desperation making him reckless again. You don't understand how the modern digital economy works. You're stuck in the past. You are completely biased against me because you don't understand technology. Sir, I may not play your silly little games. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, rhythmic cadence that signaled the end was near. But I understand human nature. I understand a scam artist when I see one. And I understand mathematics. You took $5,000. You stole an additional $422 in unauthorized debit card charges. You produced nothing. You contributed nothing. She gave it to me. It was a gift. You have no proof otherwise. I have your text message, sir. I have the bank statements. I have your own ridiculous, self-incriminating testimony. I picked up the entirety of his counterclaim, all 3 pages of his whining and excuses, and I ripped it in half right in front of him. He gasped as if I had just stabbed him. Your counterclaim is frivolous, it is vexatious, and it is dismissed with extreme prejudice, I announced, tossing the torn papers into the trash can beside my desk. You are not a victim, Mr. Sterling. You are a con man who got caught. And now the bill has come due. You can't do that, he shouted, slamming his fists on the podium. You're not even listening to me. This is a kangaroo court. Sir, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, I said, glaring at him with every ounce of authority I possessed. You should have spent a lot more time listening and a lot less time talking. The phrase kangaroo court hung in the air like a bad odor. I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for my gavel. I simply lowered my chin, peered over the rims of my glasses, and gave Mr. Sterling the kind of look that has withered men twice his size and half his arrogance. A kangaroo court, I repeated, tasting the sheer audacity of the words. Let me tell you something, sir. In a kangaroo court, they don't bother with evidence. They don't read your text messages where you confess to being a fraud. In this court, I operate strictly on facts. And the facts indicate that you are a thief throwing a tantrum because your victim finally cut off your allowance. He was vibrating now. The veins in his neck were bulging against his cheap collar. He was so unaccustomed to being told no that his brain was completely short-circuiting. I am not a thief, he bellowed, pointing a shaky finger at Miss Vance. She offered it. She knew I was a visionary. She was an investment partner. And in business, investments carry risk. Miss Vance, who had been trembling for the first 20 minutes of this proceeding, suddenly found her spine. Perhaps it was seeing me tear up his ridiculous counterclaim. Perhaps it was the realization that he no longer had any power over her. "I wasn't an investor, David," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I was your girlfriend, and you lied to me." Mr. Sterling whipped his head toward her, his face contorted in a sneer of pure, unfiltered venom. "Shut your mouth, Chloe. You don't know the first thing about business. You're just a glorified toothbrusher. You were lucky I even let you be part of my life." The courtroom fell dead silent. "You do not disrespect a plaintiff in my room. You do not treat my courtroom like your own personal abusive playground." I slammed my hand flat on the desk. The sound cracked like a whip. "Hey," I barked, my voice echoing off the wood paneling. "Look at me. You do not look at her. You do not speak to her. You look right here, and you keep your mouth shut, unless I ask you a question. Do you understand me?" But he was too far gone. The humiliation of being exposed on national television, combined with his own fragile, inflated ego, pushed him right over the edge. This was the total meltdown. This was the moment he decided to commit professional and social suicide in front of millions of people. "No, I don't understand you," he screamed, stepping entirely out from behind his podium. He threw his hands up in the air, his face completely red. "I am sick of this. I am sick of you sitting up there acting like you know everything. You don't know me. You don't know my genius. You're just a bitter, out-of-touch old woman who hates men." Bird was moving before the sentence even finished. He stepped off the wall, his massive frame placing itself smoothly between the bench and the defendant. Stepped back behind the podium. Now Bird commanded, his voice a low, rumbling threat. "Get your hands off me!" Sterling yelled, though Bird hadn't even touched him. He scrambled backward, bumping into the wooden railing. "You're all against me! This whole system is rigged against innovators." I held up a hand, signaling Bird to stand down. I didn't need physical force to dismantle this clown. I had the truth, and the truth is a far heavier weapon. "Innovators?" I laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was a sharp, biting sound that cut right through his hysterics. "Sir, Thomas Edison was an innovator. Steve Jobs was an innovator. You are a 20-something man-child who steals his girlfriend's debit card to buy digital clothing for a video game. Do not insult history by putting yourself in the same category." "I have proof!" he shrieked, frantically digging into the breast pocket of his cheap suit. He pulled out a crumpled, folded piece of paper and waved it in the air like a white flag. "I have my business plan right here. I brought it to show you. It proves I was working on a legitimate enterprise. It proves the $5,000 was seed money for a corporate entity." I sighed, rubbing my temples. The desperation was almost sad, if it weren't so infuriating. "Hand it to Bird," I said, my voice dripping with exhaustion. He thrust the paper into Bird's hands, glaring at me as if he had just delivered the Magna Carta. Bird unfolded the paper, glanced at it, and gave me a look that spoke volumes. He handed it up to the bench. I put my glasses back on and looked down at the so-called business plan. It was a single sheet of unlined printer paper. In the center, drawn in what appeared to be blue ballpoint pen, was a circle with the word APP written inside it. From that circle, 3 arrows pointed outward. 1 arrow pointed to the word users. The second arrow pointed to the word ADS. The third arrow pointed to a poorly drawn $ with the word profit written next to it, underlined 3 times. I stared at it. I genuinely couldn't believe my eyes. I have seen kindergarten macaroni art with more strategic foresight than this piece of paper. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "is this a joke?" "That is the conceptual framework for the user interface and monetization strategy," he stated, puffing out his chest, completely oblivious to his own sheer stupidity. "It outlines the revenue stream. It proves intent to conduct business. It proves you have the intellectual capacity of an 8-year-old, I snapped, holding the paper up for the cameras to see. "This is not a business plan. This is a doodle." You drew a circle and 3 arrows and expected this young woman to fund your entire life based on it. Do you think slapping the word profit on a piece of paper magically creates a corporation? You're simplifying it to make me look bad, he argued, his voice taking on that whiny, defensive tone again. I don't have to do anything to make you look bad, I shot back. You are doing a magnificent job of that all by yourself. You stand in my courtroom, you insult my intelligence, you insult the plaintiff, and then you hand me a doodle and call it a corporate framework. You are a textbook narcissist, Mr. Sterling. You genuinely believe that whatever pops into your head is absolute gold, and you expect everyone else to pay for the privilege of being in your presence. Before he could open his mouth to spew another ridiculous excuse, Miss Vance stepped closer to her microphone. She was done crying. The anger had finally replaced the fear, and I was thrilled to see it. Your Honor, she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong, that's not even the worst part. He didn't just take the $5,000 and the money from my debit card. When he finally moved out of my apartment, he took my grandmother's antique engagement ring and sold it to a pawn shop. The entire courtroom froze. Even Bird raised his eyebrows, his posture stiffening. I slowly turned my head to look at Mr. Sterling. The blood had completely drained from his face. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a Mack truck. The obnoxious swagger was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, paralyzing terror. A pawn shop, I repeated, my voice dropping to a terrifying, absolute whisper. Is this true, Mr. Sterling? Because if it is, we are no longer just talking about civil fraud. We are talking about grand larceny. The silence in my courtroom at that exact moment was not just quiet, it was heavy. It was the kind of suffocating silence that descends right before a very large, very ugly truth is dragged out into the harsh fluorescent light. Grand larceny. We had officially crossed the line from a foolish civil dispute over a broken heart and a bad loan into the realm of criminal activity. Stealing a family heirloom is not a misunderstanding. It is not market research. It is the act of a desperate, morally bankrupt coward. I stared at Mr. Sterling. The arrogant strut was completely gone. His shoulders were practically touching his ears, and he looked like he wanted the floorboards to open up and swallow him whole. He was sweating. Actual, visible beads of sweat were forming on his forehead. Well, I demanded, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. I asked you a question, Mr. Sterling, and I suggest you think very, very carefully about your next few words, because everything you say right now is being recorded. Did you take this young woman's grandmother's antique engagement ring and sell it to a pawn shop? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He closed it. He looked up at the ceiling as if the Almighty himself was going to drop an excuse down from the rafters. Then he looked at me, his eyes wide and panicked. It wasn't like that, he stammered, his voice dropping an entire octave. Oh, really? I leaned heavily on my elbows, locking my eyes onto his. It wasn't like, what? Did the ring magically leap off her dresser, sprout legs, march itself down to the local pawnbroker, and trade itself for cash? Because unless we are dealing with a paranormal event, somebody took it. Was it you? I took it to get appraised, he blurted out. It was a spectacular, desperate lie. It was the kind of lie a 5-year-old invents when you catch them with their hand buried in the cookie jar. Appraised, I repeated flatly. You took a ring that did not belong to you, without permission, to get it appraised. Why? Were you planning on writing a market analysis on vintage jewelry for your imaginary app? I was going to buy her a better one, he yelled, clinging to the lie with the desperate grip of a drowning man. I wanted to know how much it was worth so I could upgrade it. I was going to propose. It was a romantic gesture. A collective groan echoed from the gallery. Bert actually shook his head and muttered something under his breath. I didn't even blink. I just let the sheer, monumental stupidity of his statement hang in the air for a few seconds. A romantic gesture, I said, my tone dripping with absolute acid. Don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining, Mr. Sterling. You expect me to believe that a man who steals his girlfriend's debit card to buy virtual clothes for a video game, a man who cannot even articulate a basic business plan without using crayons, secretly stole a family heirloom to upgrade it for a marriage proposal? It's the truth, he insisted, though his voice was cracking. I turned my attention away from him. I couldn't look at his face for another second without getting a migraine. Miss Vance, how did you discover the ring was missing, and how do you know it went to a pawn shop? Chloe stood tall. She wasn't holding the manila folder like a shield anymore. She was resting her hands firmly on the podium. I noticed it was missing from my jewelry box 2 days after I kicked him out, Your Honor. I tore the apartment apart looking for it. Then I remembered he had left a gym bag in the front closet. I went through it, and I found this. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crinkled yellow receipt. I have the pawn shop ticket right here. Judge, she said clearly. He didn't appraise it. He pawned it for $800. The ticket has his name, his driver's license number, and his signature on it. Hand it to Bird, I ordered. Bird retrieved the yellow slip and placed it on my bench. I didn't even need my glasses for this one. There it was, printed in faded black ink, vintage gold diamond ring, $800. Right beneath it was the sloppy, arrogant signature of David Sterling. I picked up the receipt, holding it up by the corner. Mr. Sterling, I am looking at a pawn ticket with your signature on it. You didn't appraise this ring, you sold it. You stole a priceless family heirloom and pawned it for $800. What did you do with that money? Buy a new graphics card? The finality of the evidence broke him. The facade didn't just crack, it completely shattered. He realized in that singular moment that there were no more lies left to tell. There were no more semantic games to play. He was cornered, trapped by his own greed and his own undeniable stupidity. And when narcissists get cornered, they explode. She owed me that money, he screamed, his voice echoing violently off the walls. He slammed both hands down on the podium so hard the microphone rattled. I gave up 6 months of my life to that woman. I moved into her tiny, pathetic apartment. I listened to her complain about her boring, dead-end job every single day. I was the best thing that ever happened to her, and she threw me out like garbage. You are garbage, I yelled back, my voice rising over his, carrying the absolute authority of the law. You are a thief, a scam artist, and a parasite. You took advantage of a young woman's kindness, drained her bank account, and when there was no cash left, you stole her family's memories. You have the moral compass of a sewer rat. You can't talk to me like that, he bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. You think you're God just because you wear that robe? You're nothing. This whole court is a joke. You're just a bitter old woman taking it out on a man who actually has ambition. Ambition? I laughed, a sharp, cold sound. Stealing an old woman's engagement ring to fund your video game habit is not ambition, sir. It is a crime. And you just confessed to it on national television. He froze, his chest heaving. His eyes darted toward the cameras in the back of the room, as if he had somehow forgotten they were there. The reality of his meltdown was finally hitting him. That's right, I said, leaning forward, my voice deadly calm. We are recording, Mr. Sterling, every word you just screamed, every ridiculous justification you just made, and every admission of guilt is on tape, Miss Vance. Did you file a police report regarding this ring? Yes, Your Honor, she said, pulling a formal police document from her folder. I filed it the day I found the ticket. The police told me I had to get the ring back through civil court because he claimed it was a gift, but they have an open file. Well, they are about to get an update, I said, staring holes through the defendant. Because I am going to make sure a copy of today's transcript is sent directly to the investigating detective. You thought you were coming here to argue over a $5,000 loan, sir. But what you have actually done is gift wrap a felony grand larceny conviction for the district attorney. No, he yelled, pure panic setting in. He pointed a shaking finger at Chloe. You set me up. You planned this. You brought me on TV to ruin my life. You ruined your own life. I shot back instantly. You made the choices. You stole the money. You pawned the ring. And then you walked into my courtroom and thought you could outsmart me. That was your final, fatal mistake. The panic in Mr. Sterling's eyes was absolute. It was the raw, unfiltered terror of a man who has spent his entire life talking his way out of consequences, finally running out of words. He started backpedaling so fast he practically left skid marks on the courtroom floor. He gripped the edge of the podium, his knuckles white, and tried to force a nervous, conciliatory smile onto his face. It looked more like a grimace. "Look, Your Honor, let's just take a breath," he stammered, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Let's be reasonable here. I can get the ring back. I know exactly where it is. I'll go down to the pawn shop today, I'll pay the $800, and I'll give it right back to her. We don't need to involve the police. It was just a temporary reallocation of assets to maintain cash flow. A temporary reallocation of assets," I repeated, tasting the sheer, unadulterated nonsense of the phrase. "Sir, I have heard thieves call their crimes many things, but that is a new one even for me. You do not get to steal a car, take it for a joyride, crash it into a tree, and then offer to pay for the hubcaps to avoid jail time. That is not how the law works, and that is certainly not how life works." "But I'm offering to fix it," he whined, his voice pitching up into a nasally plea. "If she gets the ring back, there's no harm, right? No harm, no foul. I'll pay her the $5,000 for the loan, eventually, when my app launches. We can just settle this right now." "We are going to settle this right now," I told him, tapping my pen sharply on my ledger. "But not on your terms. You do not dictate the terms in this room. You gave up that right the minute you decided to treat this young woman like your personal piggy bank." I turned my attention away from the sweating, trembling mess of a man at the defendant's podium and looked at Miss Vance. The transformation in her was remarkable. When she first walked into my courtroom, she was terrified, hunched over, carrying the weight of this man's manipulation on her shoulders. Now, she was standing tall. She had her dignity back. She had looked the monster in the eye and realized he was just a pathetic little boy, hiding behind big words and a cheap suit. "Miss Vance," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, but maintaining its authoritative edge, "you are suing for $5,000, which is the maximum jurisdiction of this court. The loan itself was $5,000. The unauthorized debit charges were $422. The pawn ticket to retrieve your grandmother's ring is another $800, not including whatever interest that shop has tacked on." "Yes, Your Honor," she said clearly. "Because of the limits of my court, I can only award you $5,000 today," I explained, making sure she understood the legal parameters. "However, that judgment is strictly for the unpaid loan. I am severing the issue of the stolen ring and the unauthorized debit charges from this civil suit, leaving you completely free to pursue those matters in criminal court. Do you understand what I am telling you?" A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across her face. "Yes, Judge. I understand completely." "Good," I nodded. "When you leave here today, you will take the transcript of this hearing, you will take that pawn ticket, and you will walk directly into the police precinct. You will hand those documents to the detective in charge of your case. You tell them Judge Judy sent you, and you tell them the defendant confessed to grand larceny on the public record." "You can't do this!" Mr. Sterling shrieked, slamming his fists on the podium one last time. "You are destroying an innovator. You are ruining my future over a stupid piece of jewelry." I didn't even raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just looked at him with absolute freezing contempt. "I am not ruining your future, Mr. Sterling. You ruined it the day you decided that the rules of human decency did not apply to you. You are a hustler. You are a con man. You are a lazy, entitled parasite who thinks the world owes you a living just because you learned how to use a few buzzwords. You have no business plan. You have no app. And as of today, you have no credibility." I picked up my gavel. I rarely use it to make a point, but some cases demand a physical punctuation mark. On the plaintiff's claim for the unpaid loan, I find for the plaintiff in the full amount of $5,000. On the defendant's completely bogus, vexatious, and insulting counterclaim, it is dismissed with extreme prejudice. You are lucky I don't have the power to lock you in a cell myself. I struck the sounding block. Bang. We are done. Step out. This is completely unfair, Mr. Sterling wailed, throwing his hands in the air. I'm appealing. This whole thing is a farce. Bird didn't wait for another word. He was at the defendant's podium in 2 strides. He didn't yell. He just leaned in close to Mr. Sterling's ear. I couldn't hear what Bird said, but I saw the immediate result. All the fight drained out of the young man. His shoulders slumped, his face went completely pale, and he practically scurried toward the exit doors, dragging his pathetic, unlined piece of paper with him. He didn't look back. He just vanished into the hallway, off to face the very real, very severe consequences of his own arrogance. Miss Vance gathered her papers. She looked up at the bench, her eyes shining with tears, but this time they were tears of immense relief. She didn't have to say a word. The gratitude on her face was enough. She gave a small, respectful nod, turned on her heel, and walked out of the courtroom with her head held high. I sat back in my chair and let out a long breath. The gallery was quiet, processing the absolute tornado that had just blown through the room. I stacked the files on my desk, straightening the edges perfectly. People ask me all the time if I ever get tired of it. They ask if listening to the endless stream of lies, excuses, and sheer human stupidity wears me down. The truth is, it does. It is exhausting to witness the depths of selfishness people are capable of. But then there are days like today, days where a bully walks in thinking he owns the world and walks out carrying the heavy, inescapable weight of his own actions. Days where a victim finds her voice and takes her life back. That is why I sit on this bench. I don't do it to listen to fairy tales. I do it to find the truth, drag it out into the light, and hit it with a hammer until justice is served. If you want to lie, go write a fiction book. If you want to steal, prepare to pay the price. But if you walk into my courtroom, you better bring the truth, because I promise you I will find it. I picked up my pen, checked off the final box on the docket sheet, and looked over at Bird. Next case, I said.